I'm your host, Carmilla, and this is Cat Scratch Radio, a horror podcast. Welcome to Cat Scratch Radio. I'm here with Bert S. Lechner, cosmic horror author. So, Bert, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm a cosmic horror author on the autism spectrum. I just recently published my first paperback book last year, and I am just continuing moving forward with writing horror and just engaging with the horror community.
I love that for you. I'm also on the autism spectrum.
Splendid.
So, I have an obligatory ask that I ask everybody when they come on the show. What is your favorite scary movie?
Uh, well, I think I think probably as an autistic person, you'll probably empathize with this, but I have to kind of categorize different types of best. Um, so I think overall my favorite comfort horror film, like the one I've watched the most, is The Conjuring. Um, I think if you're just talking about most watched, that's probably my favorite. I'm a huge fan of In the Mouth of Madness and The Thing and the whole sort of John Carpenter Apocalypse trilogy. Um, and yeah, it's really hard to pick a favorite, really.
Yeah, it is. I'm very much torn between the Scream series and Trick or Treat.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to write and why horror?
Um, so originally I was when I went to college, I was planning on getting a music degree. I was really into classical music at the time. I went to a liberal arts school, studied music theory, got in on a piano scholarship, all that jazz, and then just for fun, I was writing like a tabletop role-playing game through college, just something that I'd been doing with my brother and my friends. And over time, the writing just kind of sucked me in. And after college, I decided I wanted to be an author. So I wanted to write. At the time, it was fantasy, and then as that was like 11 years ago at this point. And throughout the course of time, uh, I had a pretty difficult patch that I went through with just like mental health and surviving intimate partner violence. And through that, when I did eventually like start getting back into a state where I could write again, my writing had turned into horror, really.
It's interesting that you say that because that seems to be a thread that I hear from a lot of authors is they started writing horror because of trauma. And I also started as a fantasy writer and through trauma became a horror author.
Yeah. I think it is a really I'm sure it's a different reason for everybody that goes through that sort of experience. I know I had a precedent for horror. I've always, like, even as a kid, before I was really invested in horror, I was pretty obsessed with everything morbid and creepy. I always liked the scary people in the movies, even though I didn't really get to watch any horror movies until much later in my life. Um, so I guess I had that inclination originally, and then just um, horror sort of caught me at the end of my trauma cycle, just as a sort of safe place, I guess.
Yeah, I would definitely say that horror becomes kind of a safe place, a cathartic place for people who've gone through trauma.
Yeah, it's making up something scary kind of helps dissociate from the real scary things sometimes, I think.
I agree. So, what is it that scares you outside of your own personal trauma, if you want to talk about it?
Uh, yeah, I have a smattering of things I don't write about really, because I'm just writing to have fun most of the time. But I'm very scared of rabies. Just the inevitability of it if you don't catch it is just horrifying to me. Um, and I'm very scared of water that I can't see the bottom of or see what's around me. I hate going into rivers and lakes and hate going into the ocean. Um, and I think those are my two really big fears outside of just like people, really,
Yeah, I
you
think
know.
people is a big one for me as well. Right now, I'm writing a character who is terrified of people staring at her.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I think yeah, right before the podcast, I was watching the early Supernatural seasons and just finished the one with real people in it as the monster, and those were always like what they said in those episodes where it's like monsters make sense, people are just crazy. That's something that's kind of resonated with me.
yeah, definitely. And I'm a big fan of the early Supernatural seasons. But definitely, I think that the scariest thing I've ever written was when people were the actual monsters and not monsters.
Yeah.
So for you, where do you think horror is going to be in the next 5 years?
Um, you know, I have a couple of tangential thoughts about that. And I spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos when I'm postponing my writing. And there's a lot of or there's still a lot of analog horror that seems to be very popular in sort of YouTube media and horror video games. And we've seen some of that kind of hitting the more mainstream, like Skinamarink and some of those analog aesthetics and like long legs this year.
Hmm.
And I get the sneaking suspicion that we're probably within the next 5 years going to get like a Hollywood style backrooms film. Um, probably more analog horror just coming through over like the next year or so. Um, if this year is anything to go by, where we've had just like so many amazing horror films coming out this year so
Hmm.
far, I really hope that trend keeps on going into the next years.
Yeah, I actually did a video on found footage, or not a video, a podcast on found footage, during my first season of Cat Scratch Radio, and I absolutely love that entire style.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's got yeah. The graininess really adds something to it. I think just like texturally.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, so for books or movie recs for the audience, what would you suggest?
Uh, well, I mentioned Long Legs just a moment ago. Definitely go see that while that's in films. I had a really good time with that one. That was like some iffy bits, but overall great. As far as books, I think, I've done a pretty bad job of keeping up with what's modern. Um, I think I would. Something I'm reading now is Jessica Gleason's Playing Hooky, which I think is available on Kindle specifically. That's a really fun read. That's kind of just like in your face consistently. It's got a very colorful cast, some really interesting entity involved in there, and some pretty creative gore to it. I think my standard recommendation authors, and I hope I pronounce their all names right because I don't say them aloud much, but um, just go check out Cassidy McCurdy, go check out Alana Drex, um, go check out Mike Salt if you haven't read any of his stuff yet. Uh, there's I would say that if you're gonna get a horror book, go with an indie author, really. because there's so many cool and creative indie horror authors out there right now. You really don't need to go trad pub for horror right now.
Yeah, I've noticed that that's been a big boom in the horror industry has been indie publishing, and I think that's fantastic. I personally am going through the publishing route, but I also have some fantasy books and stuff that I'm trying to publish. So,
Yeah.
um, but I do think that horror is really popping off in the indie publishing, and I love that so much. So, tell me about your most recent work in progress.
A work in progress. So I've been having a hard time writing recently. Just kind of like I this week I just released a non-horror book. I released a poetry collection called A Broken Vase Envenomed, about the trauma I experienced in my experiences with intimate partner violence, and that's kind of been on my mind a lot. So writing's kind of struggled a bit, but I think I wrote about it today. I have some front burner projects, and then I have a whole bunch of back burner projects. The two books I'm kind of working on in tandem right now. I have a novella, or what's shaping up to be a novella, which is going to have a follow-up to a handful of the characters I mentioned in my first collection of short horror stories, The Roots Grow into the Earth.
Mhm.
And then the other story I'm working on right now is the first in a serial I'd like to produce that's more of a Victorian era cosmic horror, um, which is opposed to my general sort of cosmic horror urban fantasy vibe that I've been working with for a while.
I really like that. That's a really cool setting concept. So, you said you have a published book, right?
Yeah, I just well, so yeah, I have two of my own published books. I have a few published short stories, and then I was recently featured in a horror anthology. Um, so you've got my collection of short cosmic horror stories, The Roots Grow into the Earth. That was released last year. That's got 10 short horror stories, all sort of in the same setting, in this sort of occult cosmic horror, urban fantasy sort of setting. Uh, the anthology I'm part of is called Curbside Curses. It's the first publication by House of the Macabre Publishing, and this was 22 indie horror authors, including myself, who banded together and made this anthology about a cursed yard sale and the different cursed items that people bought.
Oh, that's
Uh,
really cool.
yeah, that was really fun. And then yeah, my third book that just came out this week is not horror related, but it's yeah my poetry collection about surviving, healing, and thriving after emotional abuse.
So, of the collection of your published works, what's your favorite?
Mm. I have to say the roots grow into the earth. Um, Although I am quite pleased with the story I added to the anthology. I think yes, my first collection is my favorite.
That's definitely fair. So, what is something that readers would be surprised to find out about you?
Um, I think I'm pretty open on Instagram. I generally am I do my best to be a pretty vulnerable, open book sort of person. There's probably not a lot people would be surprised about. But if you're not on Instagram, it would probably surprise you that I, for all of the cosmic horror write, I love really cute things. Huge fan of stuffed animals and kittens and cats and just all the sort of vibrant, happy things in the world. I'm a big fan of mycology and mushrooms. I love bees. So just kind of a divergent personality element there that doesn't really come through in my horror usually.
I can relate to that heavily. I actually have an entire bed full of stuffed animals. So,
I am jealous. I think my cats would rip them to shreds if I did that. So,
oh no. I'm lucky that my cats are a little more well behaved when it comes to my stuffed animals than they mostly go for the furniture. So, are any of your stories inspired from personal experience or just the poetry book?
uh, so, I think yeah, I think a lot of authors will probably resonate with this. A lot of personal experiences slipped into my writing without me noticing at first. So a lot of the trauma, especially I experienced when I in the roots grow into the earth. It starts to sneak in the novelette in there titled "The Wall," where sort of um, feelings of being trapped and losing control of myself that I experienced in that really terrible relationship.
Mhm.
I just kind of wrote those into the story, just as something that the main character experiences. Except in his case, it's a more eldritch, supernatural sort of influence that's causing it. And then I ended up doing the same thing in the last story in that collection, titled "His Castle Crumbles," in which sort of I didn't mean to write it at first, but the the relationship in that short story between the protagonist and his unnamed cosmic patron is very much sort of a abusive relationship where the cosmic patron is using sort of love bombing and ignoring techniques to get what it wants from from the protagonist, just at the cost of that protagonist's sanity and physicality.
Oh wow, that's a really interesting way to go about it. My my ex was very much the love bombing type of person, so I can relate to that on some level.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I am too. So on a lighter note, what's your favorite form of horror and why?
So, like format, like book, film, video game, or like
Uh,
genre?
Either or.
Okay. I mean, books, of course, because I write them, and then movies. Pretty much always have a horror movie or a horror show on when I'm not writing. Um, and as far as genre goes, I'm a really big fan of just supernatural. So like just ghosts, eldritch entities, cosmic horror. Just I like the supernatural and the occult. I like those vibes. And so just like if something's got that in it, I'm just like hooking onto that.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of what scares me the most is the things that we don't know about. So supernatural horror is one of my favorites, and um, that's probably why I latched to the Supernatural series so much because it's like an anthology of supernatural horror.
Yeah, no, exactly. That was probably why I did too. And I know like when I watched the X-Files for the first time, I got hooked on more of the sort of less alien episodes and more of the sort of creature of the week episodes with those sort of mysteries to them, and sort of for the same reasons.
Yeah, I think X-Files is an excellent. I do like their creatures and stuff like that. Aliens are okay. I think as far as alien horror goes, Signs is probably still one of my favorites. But overall, I'm not a big alien fan.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. Yeah, aliens, I feel are more sci-fi than horror for me at least. I do love me a good xenomorph, though. Those you can, yeah, Geiger aesthetics just send me, as the kids say. Or is that what the kids say now? Or last,
It's more of a millennial thing now,
oh, that's
but
the last round of kids. Dang it. All right. Oh.
but yeah. So what is your least favorite horror?
Uh, I I don't like violence for violence sake. I don't like revenge horror. I don't like torture porn horror. Um, I don't generally watch a lot of slashers unless it's a supernatural entity doing the slashing. Um, so yeah, I would say just like yeah, I would call it violence for violence sake genre of horror is really the type I don't like the most.
That makes sense. On that topic, when you say supernatural entities like doing the slashing, how do you feel about the Jason movies and the Halloween movies with Michael Myers?
Yeah, I think that's a good point because those are like that is kind of straying the boundary where like they are definitely supernatural in some sense, but they are also sort of obviously humanoid
Hmm.
as well. Um, and I think it just yeah, I think that's kind of a muddy water area um, that I haven't really Friday the 13th and Halloween and Scream are sort of series that I've only really engaged with through like the Dead Meat podcast. I have watched some of Nightmare on Elm Street, and I enjoyed that. So yeah, there is sort of a gray area where my definition of what I don't like doesn't exactly match the genre. So um, it's yeah, it's kind of internally confusing for me, I guess.
Well, that's fair. So what is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Oh wow, yeah. Uh, I don't know. That's one of those things where you especially as an autistic person, you right like people give you advice and you're like, no, you're an authority. I'm not listening to you. I'm gonna figure it out my own way. Well, so I guess the best advice for like I don't know. I guess not directly given to me, but honestly, like Dory from Finding Nemo, when she just says just keep swimming, that is that is peak advice right there.
Oh, I
Um,
can definitely agree with that.
there's a lot of really hard stuff that life likes to throw at all of us, and sometimes just keep swimming is the only way that you can sort of crawl your way through it and like get to a safe place where you can actually rest and get ready for the next leg of the journey.
Yeah, definitely. So now that we've gone through some of the more serious questions, I have some fun questions for you. Have
Okay.
you ever been to a haunted house? Not like, oh, I went to a haunted house for Halloween, but like a house that was said to be haunted.
Haunted house, no, but when I was living in Australia briefly, there was this patch of mountains in like the Victoria area, well, the Victoria area of Australia, which were purported to be haunted, um, where a lot of people had gone missing, and like, allegedly there were spirits and things there. And I remember at the time I was pretty young and impressionable, so I got very spooked there, but I didn't see anything.
You didn't see anything. Well, if you had seen anything, it'd be a much more like spooky thing to feel about, I would say.
Yeah.
So, have you in your life ever seen or felt a ghost that you think that you've seen or felt?
Uh, well, I had a sleep paralysis event, which was very ghost-like, where I woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't move, and we were in my grandparents' house, and so I saw a shadow in the corner, like we're in the doorway, that I sensed was my grandfather, and I was sleeping on the couch, so they sort of moved my legs out of the way. Um, and then I was able to get free and wake up.
Oh, wow.
But you know, it's a Scully Mulder moment where I'd love to believe it was my grandfather, but the Scully in me tells me that it was sleep paralysis.
Right.
Um, and I think yeah, that's a daily basis struggle I have. Where I would love to believe that there are ghosts and apparitions and things, but the Scully in me sort of is pretty skeptical.
Okay, so last question. In a scary movie, is it scarier for you to see the monster or not see it at all?
I think you have to have a blend. Um, it's like you gotta. What was the film I was thinking about with this? Actually, it was Long Legs that I was thinking about it. Like when it comes to a movie, I feel like you gotta have a payout at the end, especially if you're going for that slow dread crawl. And I think those make for the best horror movies where you've got that lingering slow dread where you're seeing, you know, bits and pieces of the creature or bits and pieces of the story, and you're seeing what it leaves in its wake. And there is some sort of mystery and creep factor around not exactly knowing what it is you look like. But at some point, like if you don't get to see the monster the entire time, by the end of the movie, you're going to be a little bit disappointed that you didn't get to see the whole monster.
Yeah,
So,
I can agree with that.
yeah. So I think yeah, you gotta find the right balance between like how much of the monster you show and then when to show just enough of the monster to keep that impact. Because like you don't wanna fall into the trap of like having to show the crappy prosthetic thing at the end. You want to
Right.
make sure that you're like showing putting the monster's best foot forward, really.
And my last interview, we talked about this a little bit, and we were talking about the movie Smile. Have you seen that one?
I really want to see that. I think I saw a clip of like the ending of the critter.
Yeah, you don't get to see the monster until the very end, and it's
Yeah.
very spooky. I loved that movie. You should definitely get a chance to see it.
Yeah. I think I know this one is probably a contentious one, but the most recent Boogeyman film that was based off the Stephen King film or Stephen King short story. I was a big fan of that monster and of that monster design. And I think I I think a lot of people would disagree with me. I do think they did a good job of hitting that balance for like keeping the monster sort of hidden for a lot of it and then coming out at the end with something really weird and delightful.
I thought that movie was fantastic, so I
Oh, good.
definitely agree. Yeah, that it was definitely one of my favorite watches when it came out.
Yeah.
So with all of that being said and done, where can my listeners find you?
Uh, so if you wanna see me on social media, I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is author Bert S. Lechner. You can I post a lot about my books, my cats, my food. If you want a more unhinged version of me, just you can look up that same profile on Threads. Um, and if you're looking to get my books, my preferred method is looking them up through bookshop.org and picking a local bookstore through Bookshop to have them shipped through.
Oh, that's a really good idea. Well, thank you. I had a really great time interviewing you, Bert, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's always happy to talk horror with people.
Yeah, me too.
You've been listening to Cat Scratch Radio, a horror podcast with your host, Carmilla Mays, also known as Matu C. Lawrence. If you want to find me on social media, just look up MX Carmilla.